The worst moments of your life never announce themselves. They arrive quietly, wearing a smile. I remember the rain first. Chicago rain has a way of turning the city into a mirror of cold lights and blurred headlights. And that night the streets outside Halstead Prime Steakhouse looked like liquid glass under the street lamps. I was standing behind the hostess podium with damp sleeves and tired feet, staring at the tip jar that barely held enough cash for a bus ride home. My name is Lily Thompson, and at that moment I had exactly $38.20 in my checking account, a rent payment due in 4 days, and another double shift ahead of me tomorrow. The dinner rush had finally slowed, the last plates clinking softly in the kitchen while the scent of grilled ribeye and rosemary butter hung in the air. I told myself if I could survive one more hour, I could go home, kick off my shoes in my tiny studio apartment, and pretend the world wasn't closing in. That's when the door opened. A gust of wet wind slipped into the restaurant first, followed by 4 men in expensive coats and the kind of confidence that fills a room before they even speak. They looked like the kind of people who never checked price tags. One of them stepped forward, tall, blonde, perfectly styled like he had walked straight out of a magazine ad for luxury watches. He glanced around the restaurant with lazy amusement, the way someone looks at a place they already assume belongs to them. "Table for 5, he said, his voice casual but sharp enough that I instinctively straightened my posture. I grabbed 5 menus and forced a polite smile, the one every server learns to wear like armor. "Right this way." His friends followed, laughing about something I couldn't quite hear, their shoes leaving faint rain prints across the polished floor. When we reached their table near the center of the dining room, he didn't sit down right away. Instead, he studied me for a second like he was deciding whether I was interesting enough to notice. "You new here?" he asked. "A few months," I said, placing the menus down carefully. "Can I start you with something to drink?" His lips curled into a small smirk. "Bourbon. Top shelf." His friends ordered the same. I nodded and headed toward the bar, already feeling the familiar knot of exhaustion pressing behind my eyes. Nights like this were predictable. Wealthy customers, loud laughter, the occasional comment meant to remind you that you were the one carrying the tray. I told myself it was fine. Tips mattered more than pride when rent was due. By the time I returned with their drinks balanced on my tray, the table was louder, the laughter sharper. The blonde man, Tyler, one of his friends had called him, leaned back in his chair as I set the glasses down one by one. When I reached his hand moved suddenly, just enough that the glass tipped and a splash of amber liquid ran across the white tablecloth. Tyler looked down at the spill, then back at me, the corner of his mouth lifting slowly as if the entire moment had been a private joke. And something about the way his friends went quiet told me the night I thought would end quietly was only just beginning. For a moment nobody moved. The amber stain spread slowly across the white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like it had been waiting there all night. Tyler looked down at it, then at the glass in his hand, then finally at me. The silence around the table lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer. Long enough for every server instinct in my body to wake up. Apologize. Clean it. Fix the problem before it becomes something worse. I reached for a cloth tucked into the side of my apron. I was already leaning forward when Tyler spoke again. "Wow," he said softly, like he was impressed. "You are really good at that." I blinked. "I'm sorry about the spill. I can bring another drink." One of his friends chuckled under his breath. Tyler tilted his head slightly, studying me again, the way someone might examine a painting they were not sure they liked. "You spilled it," he said. His tone was light, but something underneath it felt sharp. I glanced at the glass. His hand had clearly bumped it, but arguing with customers was not exactly part of my job description. Not when rent was due in 4 days. "I apologize," I said again quietly. "Let me fix the table." I reached forward with the cloth, but Tyler's hand suddenly pressed down on the edge of the tablecloth, stopping me before I could wipe the spill. His fingers were relaxed, almost lazy, but the message was clear. "Do not move." The laughter around the table faded again. "Hold on," he said. "You are not just going to walk away from that." My stomach tightened. I could feel other tables beginning to glance in our direction. In a place like Halstead Prime, attention was not a good thing. Especially not attention tied to customers who looked like they had never been told no in their lives. "Sir, I will replace the drink immediately," I said. Tyler leaned back in his chair slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "You know what the problem is?" he said. looking around at his friends like he was delivering a punchline. People stop caring about service these days. A few of them nodded, playing along. Someone laughed quietly. Tyler lifted his bourbon glass, swirling the remaining liquid like a wine critic considering a vintage. "See this?" he said, gesturing toward the stain. "That bottle probably cost more than whatever you made tonight." The words landed lightly, but they still landed. I kept my expression neutral, the way every server learns to do when pride becomes a luxury you cannot afford. "I will replace it," I repeated. Tyler leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the table now, his voice dropping just enough that only our table could hear it. "No," he said. "I think you should take responsibility." One of the men beside him smirked, already understanding where this was going. My grip tightened slightly around the cloth in my hand. "I am taking responsibility," I said carefully. "I am bringing you another drink." Tyler's smile widened just a little more. "That is not what I meant." He gestured toward the spill with 2 fingers, the motion slow and deliberate. "You made the mess," he said, "so you can get down here and clean it properly." The words hung in the air. For a moment I thought I had misheard him, but the look on his face told me I had not. Around us, the restaurant noise continued softly, forks against plates, quiet conversations, glasses clinking. But at our table, the world had narrowed down to one sentence, and the choice it was about to force me to make. For a few seconds I simply stood there holding the cloth, trying to decide if I had actually heard him correctly. The white tablecloth, the crystal glasses, the low golden lights of the dining room suddenly felt unreal, like the entire restaurant had tilted slightly off balance. Tyler watched my face carefully, clearly enjoying the moment. His friends leaned back in their chairs, their expressions somewhere between amusement and curiosity, like they were waiting to see how far this small performance would go. "Well," Tyler said after a moment, lifting one eyebrow. "You heard me." My heart beat faster, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "Sir, I can clean the table right now," I said. "But I am not going to get on the floor." One of the men at the table let out a short laugh, surprised by the answer. Tyler's smile did not disappear, but something about it changed slightly, like the joke had just become more interesting. "That is funny," he said slowly. "You think you get to decide that?" I felt the familiar weight of eyes from nearby tables. People were pretending not to look, but they were looking. In a restaurant like this, embarrassment traveled faster than the smell of grilled steak. I knew exactly what my manager would say if this situation escalated. "Keep the customer happy. Do not create a scene." The tip alone from a table like this could be more than I made in half a shift. Tyler tapped one finger lightly against the table beside the spreading bourbon stain. "Let me explain something," he said, his tone calm and confident. "When you work in a place like this, the customer is the one who decides how things get fixed." He leaned back again, folding one arm across the back of his chair. "So go ahead," he added casually. "Take care of the mess." The cloth in my hand suddenly felt heavier than it should have. I thought about my rent. I thought about the nearly empty refrigerator in my apartment. I thought about the long bus ride home through rain that had not stopped all evening. But another thought pushed forward just as strongly. If I gave in now, this moment would not stop with a spilled drink. People like Tyler always tested how far they could go. I placed the cloth gently on the table beside the glass. "I will bring you another bourbon," I said evenly. "But I will not do that." For the first time since he walked in, Tyler's expression hardened just a little. Not angry, just surprised that the script had changed. One of his friends shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another cleared his throat, glancing toward the bar as if hoping someone from management might appear and end the tension. Tyler studied me for several long seconds, then laughed quietly. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you forgot who you were talking to." I did not answer. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone, setting it on the table with a soft tap beside the bourbon glass. The gesture was slow and deliberate, like the beginning of another game. "People usually learn their place pretty quickly," he said, unlocking the screen. "But sometimes they need a little help understanding how the world actually works." He slid the phone across the table toward me. The bright screen reflected in the polished wood. "Go ahead," Tyler said, his voice smooth again. "Call whoever you think is important enough to save you from this situation." The men at the table chuckled, already expecting the outcome. Tyler leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on mine. "Call anyone you want," he added with an amused smile. "I promise this will be entertaining." The phone sat on the table between us, its screen glowing softly under the restaurant lights like a dare waiting to be accepted. For a second I did not touch it. I could hear the quiet rhythm of the dining room around us again, silverware clinking against plates, low conversations drifting through the air, the faint hiss from the open kitchen where steaks still touched hot iron grills. But at this table, everything had slowed down. Tyler leaned back in his chair, watching me with the relaxed confidence of someone who had already decided how the story would end. His friends looked between the two of us with open amusement. One of them lifted his glass and took a slow sip, clearly enjoying the show. "What is wrong?" Tyler asked lightly. "You cannot think of anyone." I glanced down at the phone. My reflection stared back from the dark screen. A tired waitress in a black apron standing in the middle of a room, full of people who suddenly felt very far away. The truth was simple. I did not have powerful friends. I did not have family members who could call lawyers or executives or restaurant owners. My world was small. A tiny apartment. A community college nursing program I was still trying to finish. A life measured in hourly wages and bus schedules. Tyler tapped the edge of the phone with one finger. "Come on," he said with a laugh. "You looked confident a minute ago." One of the men beside him leaned forward slightly. "Maybe she is going to call the mayor," he joked. The table erupted in quiet laughter again. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I did not look away from the phone. Because there was one number saved there that most people would not expect. A number I had not planned to use tonight. Maybe not ever again if I could avoid it. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could still remember the day it had been given to me. A simple sentence spoken calmly. "If you ever find yourself in trouble, call." I had almost laughed at the time because the idea felt impossible. My life was not the kind of life that crossed paths with men who solved problems like that. But tonight the impossible suddenly felt very real. Tyler leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the table, his smile growing sharper as he watched my hesitation. "You see," he said quietly, "this is the moment people usually understand something important." I looked up. "And what is that?" Tyler tilted his head slightly. "That the world is not fair," he replied. "Some people give orders. Some people follow them." His friends nodded, the confidence of men who had never had reason to question the rule. I felt my fingers tighten slightly around the edge of the phone. The rain outside tapped softly against the tall windows of the restaurant, steady and patient. Somewhere near the bar a glass shattered lightly, and a server hurried to clean it. Life continued everywhere except this table. Tyler pushed the phone another inch toward me. "Go ahead," he said again. "Call whoever you want." His voice carried just enough challenge to make the men around him grin. They were certain nothing interesting would happen. Certain the night would end exactly the way Tyler expected. I inhaled slowly and unlocked the screen. For the first time since this conversation began, Tyler's eyes narrowed slightly with curiosity. I scrolled down my contact list until I reached the name that had not been touched in months. My thumb hovered for a moment longer. Then I pressed call. The phone began to ring. Once. Twice. Tyler chuckled under his breath. "This is going to be good," he murmured. But then the ringing stopped, and a calm voice answered on the other end of the line. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, deep, and steady, the kind of voice that did not need to raise itself to command attention. "Hello." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The sound of it pulled me back months, to a quiet afternoon I had almost convinced myself had never really mattered. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "It is Lily," I said softly. The reaction across the table was immediate. Tyler leaned forward with interest, one elbow resting casually beside the bourbon stain. His friends exchanged amused looks like they were about to hear the name of some powerless roommate or distant cousin. Tyler lifted his glass and swirled the remaining bourbon slowly. "Lily," he repeated under his breath, tasting the name like it was part of the entertainment. On the phone there was a brief pause. Not a confused pause. Not the kind people make when they are trying to remember who you are. It was the kind of pause that meant the person already knew. "Yes," the voice said finally. "I remember." Something about the certainty in those words made the air feel heavier. I could hear the faint hum of traffic through the phone, distant engines and city noise, as if the man on the other side of the line stood somewhere outdoors. "Is everything all right?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried a quiet weight that made Tyler raise one eyebrow with curiosity. I hesitated. Explaining the situation suddenly felt strange with so many eyes watching me. Tyler noticed the hesitation immediately. With a quick movement, he reached forward and gently took the phone from my hand before I could say another word. It was not rough. It was almost playful, but it shifted the control of the conversation instantly. Tyler pressed the phone to his ear and leaned back again with a relaxed grin. "Well, this is interesting," he said into the receiver. His friends chuckled quietly, leaning in to listen. "Your friend here seems to think you can help her." Across the table, I watched the amusement in Tyler's face, the confidence that nothing about this call could possibly threaten him. On the other end of the line, the voice did not change. "Who is this?" Tyler laughed softly. "Someone enjoying a very expensive dinner," he replied. "And someone who just had his drink spilled by your waitress." The men around him smirked. One of them whispered something about how this story was getting better. Tyler continued speaking, his tone smooth and mocking. "She decided the best solution was to call you." He paused for effect, glancing toward me with a look that suggested the entire moment was nothing more than a performance. "So tell me something," Tyler added, tapping one finger lightly on the table beside the phone. "Should I be impressed?" The restaurant lights reflected off the polished wood as the room around us seemed to quiet slightly again. The answer on the other end of the line came slowly. "Put Lily back on the phone." Tyler blinked once, surprised by the calm authority in the request. Then he laughed again, louder this time, making sure his friends could hear it. "I do not think so," he said casually. "You see, I am still trying to figure out who you are." Another short pause followed. This one felt different, colder. When the voice returned, it carried a quiet patience that made the men around the table stop smiling for just a moment. "Then perhaps you should ask," the man said. Tyler tilted his head slightly, still amused, but now a little more curious. "All right," he replied with a grin. "Let us try that." He leaned closer to the phone. "Who exactly am I speaking with?" The answer came clear and unhurried. "My name is Vincent Moretti." And for the first time since this entire conversation began, the laughter at the table stopped. The name seemed to settle over the table like a sudden drop in temperature. For a moment nobody spoke. Tyler still held the phone near his ear, but the confident smile that had been there seconds earlier did not return quite the same way. One of his friends shifted in his seat and glanced at the others as if silently asking whether they had heard correctly. Tyler recovered quickly, letting out a short laugh that sounded a little louder than before. "Vincent Moretti," he repeated, almost casually, like he was testing the sound of it. "That is a strong name." Across the table, I watched his expression carefully. Tyler was not the kind of man who admitted uncertainty easily, but something in his eyes had changed. Not fear. Not yet. Just curiosity that had turned a little sharper. On the other end of the phone, the voice remained steady, patient in a way that suggested the man speaking had no reason to rush anything. "Yes," Vincent said simply. The quiet response carried more weight than Tyler's laughter. Tyler leaned back in his chair again, crossing one leg over the other like he was settling into a longer conversation. His friends leaned in slightly, sensing the shift even if they did not fully understand it yet. "All right, Mr. Moretti," Tyler said, his tone smooth again but more careful. "Your friend here spilled my drink and then decided she did not want to clean up the mess." He gestured toward the stain on the white tablecloth as if Vincent could somehow see it through the phone. "Now she is standing here acting like she is too important for basic service." The men at the table nodded faintly, though their earlier amusement had faded into something quieter. Vincent did not respond immediately. The pause stretched long enough that the sounds of the restaurant began to return again. A waiter passed nearby carrying a tray of plates. Somewhere behind the bar a cork popped from a bottle. Finally Vincent spoke. "Put Lily back on the phone." The request came in the same calm tone as before. Tyler smiled again, but it was thinner now. "You really want to talk to her that badly?" he asked. "You see, I am the one currently dealing with the situation." Another pause followed. When Vincent spoke again, his voice had not changed, but something about the quiet certainty in it made even Tyler's friends stop moving. "Put her on the phone." Tyler studied the screen for a second, then slowly held the phone out toward me again. "Your turn," he said lightly. I stepped closer and took the phone, feeling the weight of several pairs of eyes watching every movement. "Hello," I said carefully. "Lily." Vincent's voice was softer now, though the control behind it remained clear. "Are you safe?" The question caught me slightly off guard. I glanced around the restaurant. The lights were still warm. The rain still tapped against the windows. Nothing looked dangerous, but the tension at the table was unmistakable. Yes, I answered quietly. I am fine. Good, Vincent replied. A short silence passed before he continued. Stay where you are. I frowned slightly. What? Stay where you are, he repeated calmly. I am 10 minutes away. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Tyler leaned forward immediately, catching enough of the conversation to understand the implication. 10 minutes, he said with a smirk, clearly amused again. You are actually coming here? I looked at him, then back at the phone. Vincent's answer was simple. Yes. Tyler laughed, shaking his head as he leaned back in his chair again. Well, he said loudly enough for the table to hear. This just got a lot more interesting. But across from him, one of his friends was no longer smiling at all. The line went silent after Vincent's last words, but the echo of them seemed to stay in the air around the table. 10 minutes. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, my fingers still wrapped around it, as if the call had left some kind of weight behind. Tyler watched me carefully, the corner of his mouth lifting again into a relaxed smile. So, he said, spreading his hands slightly across the table, your mysterious friend is on his way. His tone carried the same amusement as before, but the room around us had changed. One of the men sitting to Tyler's right shifted in his chair, his earlier grin gone now. He leaned slightly toward Tyler and muttered something under his breath. I could not hear the words clearly, but I did hear the name. Vincent Moretti. Tyler waved him off with a short laugh. Relax, he said quietly. It is Chicago. There are probably a dozen people with that name. The man did not look convinced. Tyler turned back toward me and reached for his bourbon glass again, lifting it and studying the stain on the tablecloth like the entire situation still amused him. Well, Lily, he said lightly. Looks like we are all waiting together now. I placed the phone back on the table carefully. My heart was still beating faster than usual. But something else had settled in its place. Not confidence exactly. More like the strange calm that comes when a decision has already been made and there is nothing left to do but wait. Around us the restaurant had begun to notice. Conversations at nearby tables had grown quieter, curious glances drifting toward our corner more often now. The staff pretended to focus on their work, but I could see the tension in the way one of the servers lingered near the bar watching us. Tyler leaned back in his chair again, crossing his arms loosely. You know, he said after a moment, this might actually make the night better. One of his friends forced a laugh, though it sounded less certain than before. What if the guy really shows up, he asked. Tyler shrugged. Then he shows up. He tilted his head toward me with a grin. Maybe he will even buy us another drink. The men at the table chuckled, but the laughter faded quickly. Because outside the tall front windows, the rain had begun to slow. And through the glass, headlights swept across the wet pavement as a dark vehicle pulled up along the curb. One of Tyler's friends noticed it first. His gaze drifted toward the window, then stayed there longer than necessary. Another pair of headlights appeared behind the first car. Then another. The quiet hum of engines filled the street outside, low and controlled. Tyler followed their eyes with mild curiosity and turned his head toward the window as well. For a moment, he simply watched the reflections of black vehicles settling along the curb beneath the restaurant lights. The engines did not rev loudly. No doors slammed. Everything happened with the calm precision of people who knew exactly where they were going. Tyler's smile returned slowly as he turned back toward the table. Well, he said, tapping his fingers lightly against the wood. Looks like your friend might actually be punctual. But across from him, the man who had whispered earlier was no longer smiling at all. For a few seconds nobody at the table spoke. Outside the tall glass windows, the black vehicles had stopped along the curb in a quiet line, their headlights reflecting across the rain-soaked pavement like pale gold ribbons. The engines idled softly, steady and controlled, the kind of sound that did not belong to tourists or delivery drivers. Tyler followed the direction of his friend's eyes again and leaned slightly to look past my shoulder toward the entrance. His expression still carried that relaxed confidence, but now there was curiosity in it too. Looks like your friend travels with company, he said with a short laugh, though it sounded thinner than before. One of the men beside him shifted in his seat and lowered his voice. Tyler, I am serious, he murmured. You should think about this. Tyler waved him off again, though this time the gesture was slower. Relax, he said. We are having dinner, not negotiating a treaty. Across the dining room, the hostess near the front door had noticed the vehicles too. I watched her straighten slightly behind the podium as the restaurant entrance opened. Cold air drifted in from the street along with the faint smell of rain and asphalt. Several customers near the windows turned their heads, curious about the sudden arrival outside. The first man who stepped through the door did not speak. He wore a dark coat, tailored and simple, and his eyes moved across the room with quiet focus before he stepped aside. Two more men followed behind him, just as composed, their presence calm but unmistakably purposeful. Conversations throughout the restaurant began to fade one by one. Not dramatically, just the subtle quiet that happens when people sense something important without understanding exactly why. Tyler watched the doorway now, his glass paused halfway to his lips. Well, he said under his breath, that is impressive timing. The men who had entered did not approach our table yet. Instead, they paused near the front, scanning the room briefly before one of them spoke quietly into a small device near his collar. The moment lasted only seconds, but the effect was immediate. The restaurant manager hurried from behind the bar, his expression suddenly attentive in a way I had never seen before. He spoke briefly with the men near the entrance, nodding quickly as if he had just realized who they were expecting. At our table, the silence had grown heavier. Tyler set his glass down slowly. His smile returned, but it no longer carried the easy amusement from earlier. This place really knows how to welcome guests, he said, though his voice had lowered slightly. The man beside him who had warned him earlier was now staring directly at the doorway. Tyler, he whispered again, more urgently this time. I think you should stop talking. Tyler frowned slightly and turned back toward the entrance. And then the room changed again, because the man who walked in next did not hurry. He moved with the calm patience of someone who never needed to rush anywhere. His dark coat fell neatly along his shoulders, rain droplets still clinging to the fabric from outside. Conversations across the restaurant faded completely now as people noticed him crossing the floor with steady, unhurried steps. He did not look around much. His attention moved once across the room, then settled in one direction, toward our table. My breath caught before I could stop it. Tyler followed my gaze and slowly turned in his chair. For the first time that night, the smile disappeared completely from his face. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the man walked toward our table. His steps were unhurried, measured, each one landing softly against the polished floor like he had crossed rooms like this his entire life. The lights above reflected faintly on the rain still clinging to his dark coat, and the quiet authority in the way he moved made people instinctively shift out of his path without being asked. I felt my heartbeat quicken again, but this time it was not the same nervous fear as before. It was something heavier, something final. Tyler turned fully in his chair now, following the approaching figure with narrowed eyes. The confidence he had worn all evening had not disappeared completely, but it was no longer effortless. It looked like a mask he was trying to keep in place. The man stopped beside our table. Up close, he looked exactly the way his voice had sounded on the phone. Calm, controlled. His gaze moved first to me, just for a second. His eyes studied my face quietly, checking something only he seemed to understand. Lily, he said simply. Hearing my name spoken that way made the tight knot in my chest loosen slightly. I nodded once. Yes. Only then did he turn toward Tyler. The shift in attention was subtle but unmistakable. The entire table seemed to shrink under the quiet weight of it. Tyler straightened in his chair and forced a small smile. Well, he said, spreading his hands lightly across the table, you must be Vincent. Vincent did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted across the tablecloth, taking in the bourbon stain, the glass, the phone lying near my hand. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same calm tone from the phone call. I understand there was a problem. Tyler gave a short laugh. Not really a problem, he said. Just a misunderstanding with your friend. One of his companions shifted uncomfortably, staring down at the table as if hoping the moment would end quickly. Vincent looked at Tyler for a long second without blinking. Then he spoke again, his voice still quiet. Did you ask her to kneel? The question landed gently, but it silenced the entire table. Tyler's smile flickered. It was a joke, he replied. Everyone here knows that. Vincent's gaze did not move. I see. Another brief silence followed. I could feel several customers across the dining room watching openly now, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they did not know the names involved. Tyler leaned back again, trying to recover his earlier ease. "Look," he said, gesturing casually toward the table. "Your friend spilled my drink and refused to clean it. That is all this is." Vincent glanced once more at the stain on the white cloth. Then he looked back at Tyler. When he spoke again, the words were slow and deliberate. "You told her to call anyone she wanted." Tyler chuckled faintly. "Yes, I did." Vincent nodded once. "And she called me." The quiet statement settled over the table like a final piece falling into place. Tyler opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out immediately. Vincent reached into his coat pocket and placed something small on the table beside the glass. A black card, simple and unmarked except for a name pressed into the surface. The same name that had silenced the laughter minutes earlier. Vincent looked at Tyler one last time. "Next time," he said calmly, "choose your audience more carefully." Then he turned back toward me. "You are finished working tonight," he said quietly. "Come with me." And standing there beside the table, I realized my life had just changed in a way I had never imagined.